What if the laws of physics were only suggestions, rules followed by most of the universe, but broken in rare, hidden places? This story begins not with a discovery, but with a question. One whispered across chalkboards, muttered during late-night lab shifts, and buried in the footnotes of declassified reports. What if the constants we trust, gravity, time, light, can break? Scattered across Earth are places that shouldn't exist, not because they are hard to reach, but because reality itself behaves differently within them. Mountains where gravity pulls upward, forests where time slows down, caverns where entropy forgets its direction. Each one defies a law of physics so fundamental we barely question it. These are not myths, not folklore passed down through generations. They are documented, studied, then swiftly hidden. Governments seal them off, maps erase them. Scientists who stumble too close are silenced by reassignments or secrecy clauses. The records that remain are fragmented, half-denied, and deeply unsettling. What you are about to hear is not a conspiracy. It's not even a warning. It is a journey, a quiet exploration of the edges of what we call reality. Each chapter will open a door into a place where the universe behaves like a dream, familiar yet distorted, governed by rules that seem to whisper, "Not here." We'll travel to 10 such places, each one a pocket of impossibility, each one a reminder that certainty is an illusion we cling to in a world far stranger than we know. Let us begin with the road where gravity runs backward and nothing falls the way it should. It starts with a road carved into the spine of the Himalayas, 14,000 feet above sea level, where the Earth seems to breathe in reverse. Locals call it the Gravity Hill of Lydda. On the surface, it appears unremarkable, a stretch of asphalt winding along the Kargil Highway in northern India. But here, something ancient and unseen stirs beneath the wheels of parked cars. Place a stone at the roadside and it crawls uphill. Turn off your engine on a slight incline, and your vehicle begins to roll backward, against gravity, against sense, against physics. In 1995, the Indian Army formally documented the anomaly. Soldiers stationed nearby watched in confusion as their 40-ton trucks climbed slopes without power. The phenomenon wasn't subtle, it was precise. Vehicles accelerated to 20 kilometers per hour, unaided by engines or external force. The road pulled them upward, defying Newton, common sense, and every equation scribbled in physics textbooks. Aircraft flying overhead encountered another oddity. At altitudes below 11,000 feet, they experienced a sudden, inexplicable thrust skyward. Pilots were forced to boost engine power just to maintain level flight, as if the sky itself was pushing them away. Dr. Rajesh Kumar, a physicist from the Indian Institute of Technology, conducted detailed surveys of the region. His instruments recorded gravitational acceleration pointing up, not toward Earth's core, but into the open air. No natural force known to science could explain such behavior. The effect spanned a precise 30-kilometer stretch with no gradual onset. It began and ended with mathematical certainty. More disturbing still, every object, from pebbles to military transport vehicles, was affected equally. Mass didn't matter. This wasn't an illusion caused by visual perspective. It was a physical inversion of one of nature's most reliable forces. Geologists searched for magnetic fields, rare minerals, or structural anomalies beneath the surface. They found none. The bedrock was standard Himalayan granite, uncharged, unmoving, and entirely ordinary. No magnetic field, no electromagnetic interference, just gravity running in reverse. Theories emerged. Was it a rupture in Earth's gravitational field, a relic of an ancient impact? A portal, as whispered in local legend, where souls are pulled skyward toward the afterlife? For villagers, the Laida Hill has always been sacred. They call it a stairway to the heavens, where the dead are carried upward, not buried beneath. The military soon classified all research, sealing off the most sensitive data. But some leaked, enough to suggest the anomaly may extend deep underground and may not be unique. Other high-altitude locations in the Himalayas have reported similar forces, though less stable and more fleeting. So what does it mean when gravity, the one force we rely on to anchor our reality, reverses course? Perhaps it reminds us that even the most dependable truths are only true until they aren't. That beneath the weight of our certainties, there are places on Earth where the universe simply shrugs and objects fall upward toward the unknown. Deep in the forests of northern Minnesota, time does not move as it should. There, beneath the shifting shadows of ancient pines, lies a space no larger than a city block. But within it, every second stretches, every moment drifts. Researchers call it Temporal Anomaly Zone 7. The name is clinical, detached. But what it describes is something far more poetic and far more disturbing. It began in 2003 with a malfunction. GPS units used in wildlife studies started returning strange errors. Atomic clocks, the most precise instruments humans have ever built, drifted inexplicably, not by milliseconds, but by full seconds. Clocks placed inside the zone lost 3.7 seconds compared to identical devices just outside its invisible boundary. The shift was small, but undeniable, and it was consistent. Dr. Sarah Chen from the National Institute of Standards and Technology led the investigation. What she found violated more than instrumentation. It violated relativity itself. According to Einstein, time dilation occurs near black holes or at speeds approaching light. But this was neither. There were no gravitational anomalies, no strong electromagnetic fields, just forest, wind, and silence. And yet, within the 200 square meter zone, time passed differently. Cesium atomic clocks, accurate to a billionth of a second, ran slow. Plant life grew faster. Tree rings defied seasonal rhythm. Organic samples pulled from the soil carbon dated as years older than their surroundings. But the most unnerving findings were human. Researchers who remained inside the zone for more than a few hours began to show biological changes. Subtle shifts in metabolism, altered sleep cycles, DNA replication occurring just slightly faster. Their bodies, it seemed, had adapted to the zone's slower flow of time, syncing with its unique tempo. The boundary was razor sharp. Step into the zone, and your watch lags behind. Step out, and time resumes its ordinary pace. The transition happens over less than a meter, an invisible curtain separating normal space from something else entirely. Some theorize a natural distortion in space-time, like a wrinkle on the skin of the Earth. Others suspect it's evidence of past experimentation, a side effect of some unknown technology. But no source has been found. The government quietly restricted access. Scientific studies were halted. The anomaly was acknowledged, then hidden. What are we to make of a place where time itself has been bent? We imagine time as steady, linear, a river flowing in one direction. But here, in a forgotten clearing in Minnesota, that river slows to a crawl. It's a place where the heartbeat of the universe stutters and the past lingers just a moment too long. Maybe it's not time that's broken here. Maybe it's our understanding of it. Perhaps time is not a constant, but a local agreement, one that, in rare places, is simply renegotiated. In the heart of the Australian outback, far beyond roads or reason, lies a silence no technology can penetrate. The land is sun-blasted and vast, stretching endlessly beneath cobalt skies. But somewhere, 800 kilometers northeast of Perth, there's a place where the air itself seems to swallow energy. A place where radios go mute, compasses spin aimlessly, and even satellites avert their gaze. Scientists call it the null-bore void. Discovered in 1987, the anomaly first appeared as a shadow, not of light, but of communication. Telecommunication satellites detected a perfect hole in the electromagnetic spectrum. No signal in, no signal out. Not a flicker of static, not even a whisper of distortion. Just absence. Dr. Michael Thornton of the Australian National University led one of the first expeditions into the zone. What he found shouldn't be possible. Electromagnetic radiation, radio, microwave, infrared, even gamma rays, vanished at the boundary. Not scattered, not reflected, absorbed completely. Devices that transmitted signals just fine outside the perimeter ceased functioning the moment they crossed the threshold. It wasn't interference. It was nullification. Radar imaging showed nothing. The void appeared black on satellite scans, a perfect silhouette carved into the outback. And yet, light still entered, the sun still shone, the trees still cast shadows. Visible light, also part of the electromagnetic spectrum, passed through without trouble. But all other frequencies were swallowed whole, violating one of Maxwell's most fundamental principles, that electromagnetic radiation is unified. Geological surveys found only limestone, no unusual minerals, no natural metallic structures. The terrain followed no magnetic gradient, and still no device could transmit or receive within the 50-kilometer boundary. Even battery-powered electronics with no external signal, digital watches, calculators, cameras, stopped working entirely. It was as if electricity itself had vanished from the land. The transition was sharp. Within centimeters, full transmission dropped to zero. Radios would hum 1 second and fall dead the next. To the human senses, the area feels eerily normal. You can walk through it, speak aloud, see the horizon stretch uninterrupted. But no machine follows. No technology survives. The Australian government quietly declared it a military zone. Civilian mapping systems were updated to erase it. Access is now restricted. The region exists only as a name spoken in sealed laboratories and forgotten research papers. And still, the silence holds. What does it mean when a fundamental force, the very one that powers our world, fails in a specific place? Perhaps it suggests that nature is not uniform, that even the most universal rules have exceptions. And in those rare, mute pockets of Earth, we are reminded how much we rely on forces we barely understand, and how quickly they can disappear without explanation. The null-bore void doesn't just break physics, it silences it. Beneath a quiet research facility near Geneva, hidden in the sterile white of a laboratory basement, there is a room where magnets forget how to behave. It's officially known as Experimental Chamber 7. But to those few who've stepped inside, it's called the inversion room, a space where magnetic north collapses inward and every compass needle turns to face a single point at the center of the floor. The phenomenon wasn't intentional. In 2008, a team of physicists experimenting with superconducting levitation systems noticed something odd. Their compass readings were erratic, then reversed, then focused. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a senior researcher from CERN, led the investigation. What they found defied one of the most elegant principles in all of physics, that magnetic field lines form continuous loops from north to south. But in Chamber 7, they don't. Instead, the lines converge. Compass needles spin wildly, then lock into place, pointing toward the room's exact center. Move the compass to another corner, and it still points inward. No matter where you stand, magnetic north becomes magnetic center. Attempts to neutralize the effect failed. Removing all electromagnetic generators only intensified it. Rewiring the room, adjusting the superconductors, even shutting down power to the entire facility. None of it stopped the pull. More unsettling, there is no detectable source. No magnet, no field coil. nothing generating this inward flow. And yet the field is there, strong enough to draw small metal tools from the hands of technicians, pinning them to the floor. At peak intensity, researchers reported entire metal carts pulled a meter across the room. Mapping the field proved impossible. Standard magnetometers gave inconsistent readings. Worse, they began to behave erratically themselves, registering values that changed based on their orientation and the observer's position, as if the field responded to being measured. Some began to suspect the room was more than a field trap, that it was a self-sustaining magnetic anomaly, one that had somehow cut itself loose from conventional cause and effect. The more they studied it, the more it evaded their models. Eventually, the Swiss government intervened. The lab was removed from all public databases, the room sealed, the data encrypted. Officially, Chamber 7 doesn't exist. But for those who were there, it remains unforgettable, a place where the invisible scaffolding of reality twisted in on itself. What does it mean when a magnetic field collapses inward without a source? Perhaps it hints at something deeper than electromagnetism, a local failure of symmetry, a breach in the rules that govern invisible forces. Or maybe, just maybe, it's a glimpse of something trying to hold itself together, a center that cannot hold, yet draws all things to it. In Chamber 7, the needle no longer points to the pole, it points to the unknown. 200 meters below the surface of Ontario, inside a repurposed mine shaft near Sudbury, gravity and mass play by different rules. The chamber was never meant for discovery. It was just another hollowed-out tunnel, cold, dark, industrial. But in 2012, a drilling rig operator noticed something strange. His equipment, a 500-kilogram machine, suddenly felt lighter near the floor. Moved upward, it gained weight, not a little, but hundreds of kilograms. It wasn't a trick of the mind. It was measurable. What came next changed everything. Dr. Amanda Price from the University of Toronto arrived with a team of physicists and precision instruments. They verified the impossible. The massive objects shifted based on their vertical position within the chamber. At floor level, objects lost mass. Near the ceiling, they became unnaturally heavy. Lead blocks, inert and consistent by nature, weighed 15% less on the floor. Lifted to the ceiling, they weighed 30% more than normal. The change was smooth, predictable, and utterly inexplicable. Scales confirmed it wasn't a change in gravitational acceleration. It was a change in the objects themselves. Water showed the most dramatic effects. Near the floor, it thinned, its density 15% below normal. Near the ceiling, it thickened, measuring denser than solid ice. This wasn't just gravity in flux. This was matter behaving differently based on its location in space. The anomaly had sharp boundaries. The transition wasn't gradual. It happened within centimeters. Move an object upward slowly, and it shifts weight suddenly, enough to throw off balance, enough to topple over. Even stranger, carbon dating of identical samples yielded wildly different results depending on their vertical position. A piece of ancient wood showed a variation of centuries in radiocarbon age from ceiling to floor, suggesting atomic decay rates themselves were being affected. The chamber became a national security zone. Canadian authorities sealed it. Access was revoked. Research halted. No explanation was ever made public. What force alters the density of matter without changing its structure? How can atoms grow heavier or lighter without gaining or losing mass? Perhaps this chamber is not a glitch in gravity, but in the deeper rules that govern mass, energy, and space itself. A place where conservation laws, the bedrock of physical reality, loosen their grip. In most of the world, matter is a constant. Here, it breathes. And as we descend deeper into these places where physics falters, we begin to wonder, what holds reality together, if not the laws we've always trusted? In the Nevada desert, far from cities and satellites, there is a patch of land where time stumbles and causality runs in reverse. It lies 150 kilometers northwest of Las Vegas, in a classified military testing ground known only to a select few. But in 1994, during routine weapons tests, it made itself known. Explosions were recorded before the triggers were activated. High-speed cameras, running at thousands of frames per second, captured the moment. Shock waves rippled outward. Dust and flame erupted. Then, seconds later, the signal to detonate was issued. The effect was not a glitch. It was repeated, measured, and verified. Dr. Jonathan Hayes from Los Alamos National Laboratory led the investigation under the strictest secrecy. What they discovered violated more than physics. It violated logic itself. Within a precisely measured 47.3-meter zone, cause and effect had inverted. Objects dropped to the ground made sound before falling. Light bulbs lit before switches were flipped. Computers displayed outputs before receiving inputs. It was as though the future was leaking into the present, undoing the arrow of time. The boundaries were tight yet absolute. Outside the zone, time behaved normally. Inside, it unraveled. Researchers described disturbing sensations. A feeling of being compelled to act, not by will, but by consequence, as if their decisions had already been made by outcomes that had already occurred. It was not merely disorienting, it was existential. In this place, free will appeared optional. The military quickly realized its value. Weapon systems were tested that could detect enemy movements before they happened. Defensive countermeasures deployed against threats still in planning. It offered a strategic advantage so great the entire zone was buried in layers of secrecy and misdirection. But those who worked closest to it whispered darker truths. Some believed the zone was not just reversing causality, but unraveling it. That the linear chain of before and after had been broken, leaving time itself adrift. Others reported dreams of events they had not yet experienced, or memories that seemed to belong to others. None of it could be explained, and none of it could be stopped. What does it mean when cause follows effect? When the future reaches backward and molds the present? Perhaps it tells us that time is not a river, but a mirror, fractured, reflective, and capable of turning inward on itself. And in this barren stretch of desert, we are forced to consider a terrifying possibility. That choice may be an illusion, and time, a loop we're doomed to trace again and again. In the silence between seconds, the future waits. And sometimes it acts first. Beneath the Swiss Alps, in a hidden chamber deep within a particle physics facility, light itself defies the universe's ultimate speed limit. They call it Project Spectrum, a sterile name for a place where photons behave with casual disobedience. It was meant to be a routine calibration of laser interferometers, part of a larger experiment unrelated to speed. But when red and blue lasers traveled the same distance in different times, the silence in the lab deepened into awe. Light was breaking its own law. Dr. Hans Mueller, a senior physicist with CERN, led the analysis. What he found shook the foundations of modern physics. Red light was moving 12% faster than the theoretical maximum, the speed of light in a vacuum. Blue light, by contrast, moved slower than expected. Identical distances, different velocities. Worse, the speed wasn't just dependent on color. It was directional. North to south beams traveled faster than east to west, and these speeds shifted slightly over the course of a day, as though the very chamber were revealing a hidden preference, a fixed frame of reference that shouldn't exist in a relativistic universe. Einstein's postulate, the cornerstone of special relativity, holds that the speed of light is constant in all inertial frames. But here, in this quiet underground room, that pillar began to crack. Efforts to photograph or record the effect failed. Cameras malfunctioned. Sensors returned impossible data. Measuring devices subjected to the same relativistic violations became unreliable. Observing the chamber seemed to pull it further from physical law. Eventually, the implications grew darker. Information transmitted by faster-than-light photons arrived before it was sent. A signal could be received before the button to send it was pressed. Temporal paradoxes, previously theoretical, were happening in real time. The room had become a bubble where causality, time, and speed blurred into something else. All electromagnetic radiation showed similar deviations, suggesting the very fabric of space-time within the chamber had been altered. Scientists theorized that this might be a region of broken symmetry, a local distortion where constants were no longer constant. The chamber, they proposed, had stumbled into a loophole in reality's code. The project was soon classified by international agreement. Project Spectrum vanished from records. The lab remained sealed, and still no explanation has surfaced. What are we to make of a universe that allows exceptions to its most sacred laws? Perhaps it reminds us that constants are not as constant as we believe, that even light, the measure of all motion, can shift, twist, and rebel under unknown conditions. And that somewhere in the deep places of Earth, the speed limit of the cosmos is just another boundary waiting to be crossed. In Project Spectrum, light outruns its shadow and time struggles to keep up. In a sealed chamber in northern Canada, built to eliminate all noise, thermal, vibrational, and electromagnetic, a silence deeper than sound was discovered, a silence in which quantum reality forgot to collapse. This was no ordinary laboratory. Designed to test gravitational wave sensors, the chamber was a masterpiece of isolation. But in 2015, researchers noticed something extraordinary. Atoms, once expected to snap into definite states upon measurement, refused to settle. Their quantum superpositions, those fragile, ghostly possibilities, remained intact. Indefinitely. Dr. Jennifer Walsh from the Institute for Quantum Computing was brought in. What she confirmed broke every expectation. Particles in the chamber did not decohere within nanoseconds as theory demanded. Instead, they remained suspended in multiple states, alive and dead, here and not here, spinning clockwise and counterclockwise, for minutes, hours, even days. Quantum mechanics is built on a strange compromise. In theory, particles exist in all possible states until observed. But in practice, the environment forces a collapse almost instantly. It's why the everyday world feels stable. But in this chamber, decoherence didn't happen. It was as though the environment had been muted so completely it stopped interfering with quantum possibility. And the effect scaled. It wasn't just atoms. Crystalline structures, billions of particles large, also exhibited sustained superposition. At one point, researchers maintained a macroscopic object in multiple physical states at once. The laws of reality didn't just bend, they waited. Worse, or perhaps more wondrous, quantum entanglement severed at the door. Particles entangled with counterparts outside the chamber instantly lost their connection when brought inside. It was as if the room sat outside the universal wave function in a quantum quarantine. The boundary was perfect, sharp to the subatomic level. Bring even part of a system outside the chamber, and coherence collapsed instantly. But inside, uncertainty reigned, pure and uninterrupted. Then came the most controversial findings. Living organisms brought into the space, simple ones at first, began to exhibit anomalies. Cellular structures maintained quantum coherence longer than possible. In neural tissues, researchers observed patterns in microtubules suggestive of quantum computation, aligning with speculative theories that consciousness itself might be rooted in quantum effects. No one could say for sure. The implications were too large. The facility was shut down, the data locked away, classified under international research protections. Officially, the anomaly never existed, but for those who glimpsed it, the experience was transformative. What does it mean if quantum superposition, the strange, shimmering ambiguity of possibility, can be preserved at human scale? If the universe only behaves classically because it is constantly watched, constantly disturbed, and in that chamber where no disturbance reaches, we see the truth, that reality may not be a thing, but a question, one that remains unanswered until we choose to ask it. In the quantum void, everything is true until it isn't. Beneath the arid surface of the Atacama Desert in Chile, in a sealed laboratory forgotten by wind and sand, the arrow of time bends backward. It began as an energy experiment, nothing unusual. Researchers were measuring the efficiency of closed thermal systems, mapping heat transfer between isolated bodies. But then something strange happened. Heat flowed the wrong way. Cold objects grew colder. Hot objects grew hotter. Without external input, without any energy source, the systems became more ordered, more structured. The second law of thermodynamics, the one that tells us entropy must always increase, simply reversed. Dr. Carlos Rodriguez, head of the research team, documented what should have been impossible. Entropy, the tendency of systems to decay into disorder, was decreasing. In this sealed room, heat engines operated at over 100% efficiency, extracting usable work from equilibrium, from what should have been stasis. At the molecular level, chaos regressed. Molecules, once dancing randomly, began to align, move with purpose, organize. Brownian motion, the jitter of thermal noise, reversed, with particles clustering rather than dispersing. Even life responded. Biological samples showed enhanced metabolic efficiency. Cellular aging markers reversed. Under controlled observation, cells maintained integrity far beyond expected limits. It was as if the environment encouraged life, not by preserving it, but by refining it. And still the zone held its silence. There was no fluctuation, no instability. The reversal was stable, absolute, and local. Step outside the room, and entropy returned. Inside, time's great engine ran in reverse. The effect had no clear boundary until measured. Then, sharply, within centimeters, it ended. The transition was jarring. Thermometers clicked into new readings. Heat gradients that should have equalized maintained impossible separations. What's most unsettling is not just the violation of a law, but the philosophical wound it opens. Entropy is more than a thermodynamic principle. It's our symbol of time itself. It defines the flow from past to future, the march of disorder, the very aging of stars and minds. But here, in a pocket of Earth, time is not decay. It is restoration. Could this be a glimpse of the universe before the Big Bang, a moment of reversed causality embedded in the crust of the Earth? Or is it an echo from the end of time, a fold where order begins to return? The Chilean government sealed the site. International physicists classified the findings. The experiment was erased from the public record, but for a moment we saw it. A place where systems unwind entropy, where chaos curls into structure, where time does not end, but begins again. And if entropy can reverse, what else might be unmade? What memories might be rewritten? What futures undone? In the Atacama, time exhales, and the universe grows young again. On a map that no longer exists, at coordinates erased from every satellite and survey, there lies a field where the universe itself forgets what it is. Anomalous Zone Alpha, they call it, though the name changes like everything else inside. Discovered in 2007 through distortions in GPS data, it appeared at first to be a glitch. But the closer researchers looked, the more reality unraveled. Fundamental constants, those sacred numbers that hold physics together, began to shift. The speed of light varied by up to 15%. Gravity swung between intensities. Even the fine structure constant, the delicate value that governs the strength of electromagnetic interaction, danced unpredictably. Inside the zone, nothing was stable. Dr. Elena Kowalski, part of an international physics consortium, led the initial probe. She documented what few believed possible, that the rules of existence weren't merely bent here, they were mutable. Masses changed. Particle behaviors fluctuated. Reactions slowed or accelerated based on shifts no one could predict. Worse still, the zone grew and shrank, expanding over 50 square kilometers one week, then collapsing to a few scattered hectares the next. No pattern, no warning, just a breath, inhale, exhale, in the fabric of the real. Electronics failed immediately. Microprocessors, relying on fixed physical laws, couldn't operate when those laws changed mid-cycle. Power failed, clocks stopped, satellites rerouted. In this place, technology could not survive, and neither could certainty. Researchers reported distorted perception. Colors shifted beyond the visible spectrum. Sounds bent, echoing as if from other dimensions. Spatial relationships warped. What was near became far. What was level became curved. Even thoughts felt slippery, unmoored from their usual order. What could explain this? Perhaps it's a region of space-time where the universe experiments, testing other configurations, other laws. Or a tier between multiverses, where our familiar physics bleeds into another incompatible reality. Or maybe it is simply a reminder that the constants we treat as divine, the speed of light, Planck's constant, the strength of gravity, are not etched in stone. They are assumptions that, until now, have held, but here, in the silence of a shifting field, they fail. The zone is monitored now from afar. Drones observe. Instruments measure, though few readings make sense. Access is denied. And yet the field pulses still, changing, breathing, waiting. If there are places where reality becomes unstable, then what is reality? A framework? A consensus? A dream so widely shared we forgot it was imagined? In anomalous zone alpha, the dream flickers, and the universe shows us its raw, unfinished edge. Somewhere deep in Ladakh, where the winds whisper through Himalayan silence, there is a road that climbs not into the sky, but into mystery. This is where we began. But the gravity hill of Lida is not alone. Across the globe, from deserts to tundras, from forest clearings to underground labs, we have now walked through places where the pillars of physical law no longer stand. But these are not disconnected marvels. They speak to one another like echoes across a canyon or scattered pages of a single forgotten text. Consider what we've witnessed. A hill where gravity reverses direction. A clearing where time lags behind itself. A void that devours all electromagnetic signals, yet lets light in untouched. A room where magnetism turns inward, drawn to a center with no source. A shaft where weight rises as you ascend, and matter changes its very mass. A desert zone where explosions precede their triggers, and the future bleeds into the present. A chamber where light outruns itself, and information bends causality. An isolation lab where quantum states hold for eternity, daring reality to collapse them. A desert where entropy regresses and order blooms spontaneously. A field where the constants of the cosmos flicker like candlelight in wind. These aren't just anomalies. They're fractures, hairline cracks in the structure of the known world, and each one, when viewed alone, bewilders. But seen together, a pattern emerges, not of chaos, but of forgotten symmetry. Maybe we've mistaken our physical laws for universal truths when they are merely local customs, habits of matter, rhythms of energy that mostly hold until they don't. Perhaps these places aren't violations of physics at all. Perhaps they are reminders that our universe is not finished, that beneath the seamless illusion of order lies a quilt stitched from different rules, stitched hurriedly, or with intention, or by something we cannot name. And we are left to wonder, are these places natural, or are they artifacts, residues of something ancient, or experimental, or lost. Some scientists believe these zones are windows into deeper layers of reality. Others say they are scars, left behind by forces too vast to comprehend. A few whisper that they are warnings, but most choose silence, because to speak too openly is to challenge the bedrock of modern understanding, and that is a weight few can carry. And yet here they are, measurable, repeatable, hidden, yes, but not erased. In these places the world tilts, the sky bends, and for a moment the universe lets us see behind the curtain, where we glimpse not just what is, but what might have been. At the edges of these anomalies lies a quiet terror and an even quieter awe. They do not scream, they do not flash with spectacle. Instead, they sit in silence, persistent and unmoved, defying explanation. A gravity hill here, a chamber of reversed entropy there, a dozen or more pockets across the earth where reality takes a breath and forgets its lines. But they are not accidents. Their precision defies randomness, sharp boundaries, constant behaviors, defined zones where natural law is not merely stretched, but rewritten. Each anomaly behaves as though governed by its own internal logic, stable, repeatable, and immune to surrounding influence. What kind of universe allows such disobedience? One theory whispers of topological defects, leftovers from the birth of the universe, where early symmetries fractured and left behind zones with different physics. Another suggests quantum foam writ large, bubbles in space-time where the constants of nature were sampled differently and remained. Or perhaps it's more unsettling still, the idea that our laws of physics are not laws at all, but agreements, terms of reality negotiated long ago and enforced only loosely in remote or forgotten places. And where those agreements lapse, we find the edges. Edges where gravity pulls upward, where time slows to a crawl, where information travels faster than light or arrives before it is sent. Where matter forgets its mass, where heat flows backward, where particles remain uncertain indefinitely. These anomalies force a kind of humility. They strip away the illusion of mastery, reminding us that understanding is not the same as control, and that control is fleeting. For governments, the response has been silence, classify, restrict, deny. Better to avoid panic, better to preserve the illusion of consistency. But behind closed doors, the research continues, because the implications are too vast, too tempting. What if we could harness entropy reversal for medicine, time dilation for space travel, causality violation for communication across time? But what if we can't contain them? What if these are not opportunities, but cracks? Not miracles, but warnings. Signals that the system we rely on is not as permanent as we believe? In the end, these places don't just alter our understanding of the universe, they alter our place within it. They remind us that we are not the authors of the laws we live by, only their observers, and sometimes only their guests. In the presence of such impossibility, we are forced to ask not just how or why, but what else? What else lies out there, hidden in valleys, buried in stone, hovering just beyond our perception? And more urgently, what happens if these anomalies grow? So where does this leave us? 14 chapters, 10 impossible places. A scattered constellation of anomalies that stretch across the earth like forgotten punctuation marks in the language of the cosmos. What do we do with the knowledge that gravity can reverse, that time can hesitate, that light can outrun itself? We reflect. These places are not just curiosities for physicists or secrets for governments to hide. They are invitations. Invitations to humility, to wonder, to the possibility that reality is broader and deeper than our models can ever fully explain. In each of these anomalies, something fundamental is suspended. The rules we believed were unbreakable are softened, undone or contradicted entirely. But these contradictions are not chaotic. They are patterned, measured, present. Perhaps that is what makes them most human, because we too are filled with contradiction. We age and yet remember. We fear and yet explore. We seek meaning in a universe that may not owe us any. And still, we search, because that is what we do. Each of these places, whether a void of magnetism or a pocket of reversed entropy, asks us to look again, to ask better questions, to accept that certainty is not the goal of science, but the beginning of a deeper curiosity. We may never know what created these anomalies. We may never understand why the constants of nature flicker in isolated corners of the world. But their existence matters, because they remind us that reality is not a closed system. It is a living question. And maybe in the end, that's the most beautiful truth of all, that in this vast and silent universe, there are still places that surprise us, places that whisper back to our deepest instincts, not just to explain, but to wonder. To ask not just how the world works, but why it works the way it does, and what waits beyond the parts we've mapped. The Earth, it seems, is still not done telling its story, and perhaps neither are we.